Getting those clean and crisp edges is always a bit of a challenge with watercolors. So I put together this composition featuring a finch and some orchids to help us walk through different helpful techniques and strategies for achieving super crisp color borders with your brush. I will mention my favorite tips, including one important detail that some beginners forget to check on their pigment labels, and that in my experience leads to the most trouble with watercolor edges, but it can be easily fixed by avoiding certain pigments altogether and making very simple substitutions. So let's get started. As always, you can find the reference photo in the video description below and practice painting the edges on your own. In the meantime, I will sketch the bird outline and tell you about the first tip for getting smoother edges while you can clearly see the texture of my paper. I'm working on cold pressed watercolor block, which has a bit of a grainy texture. Sometimes it's referred to as having a tooth. This type of watercolor paper dries slowly, which will allow me to create some beautiful wet on wet transitions, but this type of grain will also make it more challenging to create smooth lines. If you find cold pressed paper too difficult to work with and you want a truly smooth surface, you can try hot pressed paper. It's very popular with botanical artists for this exact reason. It's barely textured. However, keep in mind that hot pressed paper dries very quickly compared to cold, and you will need to work much faster if you want to create layers and color transitions wet into wet. So it's a bit of a balance. You may want to test both types and figure out which one you prefer. And now that my outline is ready, we need to decide which section of color to paint first to ensure that our edges end up being very smooth. Knowing that we have several adjacent blocks of color on the bird and several tricky edges to worry about, you want to start with the lightest one. Most of the time, the lightest area will be yellow or a shade of yellow. This applies to any subject. So for example, if you were to paint a seascape, you would probably want to start with a strip of sand, maybe using yellow ochre, before you paint the blue waters. I'm using cadmium yellow here, cadmium yellow medium hue from Daniel Smith, and I'm applying a very watery layer. I may add some color variations just for fun, dropping Scarlet Lake and maybe even sap green wet into wet. But overall, this is a yellow, very light first block of color, and every adjacent section that I paint later will blend seamlessly because it will be a bit darker and I can cover the edge ever so slightly, making sure there are no visible gaps. Tip number 3 is to always let the first section of color dry out completely before painting the adjacent edges. This is one of the most common mistakes beginners make. Rushing to put new colors next to freshly painted segments will always result in particles of paint traveling from one block of color to another, messing up what was supposed to be a crisp edge. Remember, watercolor pigments travel with water, so let's leave the yellow to dry, and I will work on a bunch of other things in the meantime. I thought I could just drop a little bit of red on the tip of the bird's beak. That section is not really touching anything. And I will also lay down some yellow underpainting on the flowers while the yellow is fresh on the palette. Although my plan is to make them red later on, the subtle yellow underpainting will make parts of the petals a little bit warmer. They will glow when I apply my reds later on, and that's exactly what I want. If you're curious about the underpainting techniques using yellow pigments, I have a ton of detailed tutorials here and also on my Patreon channel, so I will leave links to those videos below. You can check them out later. In the meantime, the yellow on the bird is dry, and I'm ready to add that green-blue section of the feathers on the left-hand side and up on top. You can see that I can get very close to my yellow now without any of my green running over, so the edge is relatively crisp. I'm using a mixture of that same cadmium yellow and a little bit of phthalo blue green shade to arrive at a nice green hue with some variations depending on the relative proportion of the two colors. I will also add some red on the face of the bird and a mixture of the same red with my cadmium yellow on the talons. Notice that I'm still reserving the darkest sections, like the black and purple feathers, along with the branch in the center. I'm doing this because some overlap of the edges will be inevitable, but it's a lot less harsh and disruptive when you apply darker colors after your light colors. Starting light and applying dark on top is a lot more natural and will mask most of the imperfections in my strokes. Another thing that I can't stress enough is that drying time is essential. So once again, I will leave the bird to dry and work on the flowers before I come back and finish the last sections of the feathers. My next tip may seem like a bit of an obscure piece of information. I realize it's only obvious if you spend a lot of time paying attention to color properties, but I feel like I have to mention it because it's often overlooked, especially in beginner level tutorials. It has to do with the staining property of your pigment and how much it affects the success of your glazing techniques. Specifically, how it can help you preserve the crisp edges, especially as you get into more advanced scenarios like the one we have here. So we have a purple section of feathers here, and I will purposely choose a low staining pigment called Cobalt Blue Violet. It's a gorgeous shade of purple, no doubt about it, but I should have picked something more staining, like for example dioxazine purple, and you will see why in just a minute. The thing about low staining pigments like the one I'm painting with is that they don't adhere to paper as well as their high staining counterparts. I can already predict that in the next step, where I glaze additional colors around the edge of the purple segment, this low staining cobalt will get reactivated and start moving around. Unfortunately, it will blur some of that crisp edge that I'm creating right now. We'll come back to this part later on so you can clearly see the problem. But for now, I will just drop a little bit of Hansa yellow and Thylo blue for some visual interest and let it dry. While it's drying, I will paint the darkest feathers on the bird using Indothrone blue. Which leads me to point number 4, stay away from black pigments straight from the tube. I know the section looks almost black in the reference photo. However, using darker blue instead will give me a lot more flexibility and preserve some of the highlights. Using black, especially in those scenarios where you have sections of a vibrant color that you want to keep clean and crisp, is a sure way to create messy accidents. In general, I don't recommend using black straight from the tube because it always looks unnatural, but in this particular scenario, where it touches other bright and pure colors, any small black brush stroke that accidentally mixes with red or green will not only blur your edges, it will also create a ton of mud. And you can't layer blacks successfully either because they kill luminosity. So for some of the smaller elements like the thin feather details that I'm painting on top of the green layer, it's much better to use a deep blue that looks almost black when fully saturated because it will allow the underlying colors to shine through. Now back to our purple section, which is completely dry by now, and I will share the last tip for smooth edges and show you how staining pigments are not the best choice for this type of work. So what I wanted to do is lay down a layer of quinacridone gold to add some dimension and build shadows on the left side of the bird. Our source of light is coming from the top right, so I really need this extra layer to make the bird look less flat. And I want to put my brush strokes across all these color segments, mimicking the natural continuous shadow that I see in the reference. Because the cobalt violet I used for this purple segment is a low staining pigment, it sort of sits on top of my paper, and my gold brush strokes, as gentle as they may be, are disturbing this violet paint. You can see the violet is starting to move, and the crisp edge I created in the beginning is getting a little bit more blurry. There's actually a messy blob forming on the left-hand side because my paint has been reactivated. I'm making this mistake on purpose because this is not a tutorial but rather a demo, so I'm basically sacrificing this painting for the purposes of this video, but I really wanted to show you exactly what I'm talking about so you can be mindful about the staining property when planning your edges and layers with confidence. What I should have used here is something like a highly staining dioxazine purple, which would remain in place completely undisturbed, allowing me to add whatever I want on top without dissolving this boundary between purple and yellow. To illustrate this further, when I apply additional colors on top of my Indothrone blue, on top of the bird's head, it actually stays in place because it's much more staining, meaning this blue adheres to the surface of my paper and it doesn't get reactivated. You can find the staining property of the pigment either on the tube or on the manufacturer's website. Usually it's indicated by a rating from 1 to 4. And you will hardly see non-staining pigments in my palette. I stay away from cobalts in general, and when I do use something low staining like ochres or siennas, I'm always mindful about not layering too much, so I avoid dissolving my edges. But you may find them valuable if you're doing softer, blurry effects. This of course has to do with my style. In general, I rely on high staining pigments like quinacridons and phthalo because they maintain crisp edges and hardly lift up when I add multiple layers up on top. Tip number 5 is to finish with your darkest values. We already talked a little bit about this in the beginning, and it's sort of self-explanatory. You want to finish with your darkest colors, whether it's branches or even some extra feather texture. I'm using my regular choice of purple here called dioxazine purple. And this last step is very similar when it comes to the flowers. You can see I have some overlapping edges there as well. And putting darker, deeper reds in the last step is a great chance to fix some of the irregularities and uneven edges that I may have created in the first layer. If I may, I'd like to come back to my earlier point about low staining pigments because I have a suspicion based on my experience that some of the issues that beginners run into with dissolving and messy edges is due to the fact that they work with low staining pigments that can easily get disturbed and lift off the paper even after you think everything is dry. At least that's been my observation in many YouTube and Instagram tutorials. And so if you're just starting out with watercolor, chances are you're picking your pigments based on how nice they look without paying too much attention to these things like transparency and staining properties. There's absolutely no shame in that. In fact, I'll be the first to admit that for the first maybe 5 years of my watercolor journey, I didn't really pay attention to pigment labels and generally was just going with the most vibrant colors I could find. In the beginning, these things matter less because you're still learning the basic techniques, but eventually you will want to level up your understanding of the colors you work with and the different color families that behave very differently on paper. So there's a reason why Winsor & Newton or Schmincke, for example, offer 200 different pigments to choose from. Even though a lot of the hues are very similar, these colors all have different properties, and things like staining is not an indication of the quality of the pigment, but rather a marker of what you can expect from your color when you use it in a painting. Sometimes you want a color that can be easily reactivated and lifted off the page, like for example when you paint soft clouds. And sometimes if you want crisp edges, you want to go for very staining pigments that will stay on paper and allow you a lot more control. So you don't want to blame yourself for having bad technique when the issue is actually the property of the pigment. I encourage you to take some time to find out the labels on your colors, read a little bit about the staining properties, stay away from low staining colors if you want really crisp edges. And share any other of your favorite tips in the comments below so others and I can learn what worked really well in your practice. I'm especially curious about your experience with different paper types and your opinions on hot versus cold and different advantages that each paper type offers us. And of course, let's not forget about the almighty algorithm. It really likes when you subscribed after watching a video, and this way you won't miss any of my upcoming watercolor tutorials. Thank you to all my patrons who make this channel possible. I really appreciate your support. Thank you everyone for watching and painting with me. I will see you soon.